Hello, everyone. My name is Keri Ramirez. I am the Managing Director of Studymove. And I just want to say thank you so much for joining this, our seven, believe it or not, seven key data update of 2025. And today we're going to talk about something that is a critical part of the way in which, in particular, universities engage with international applicants. We're going to talk about the English language requirements. For many years at StudyMove, we have been looking at how universities have different minimum scores for English language entry requirements. And today we thought it was a timely opportunity just to share some of the findings with all of you. It's quite an interesting space. It's a space that we have seen some clear differences on the approach taken by universities. And it's a very important space because that could be something that could change the experience that international students could have or here when they come to Australia. And that, of course, applies not only to Australia, but to many English study destinations around the world. And today we have some very interesting data that shows the different approach that universities are taking in this particular topic. So thank you so much for joining. So let me start sharing my screen today with some of the main slides that we're going to present to all of you. As I said, this is our seven key data update on 2025. And we decided just to talk about English language requirements because, as you know, quite recently, it was actually a month ago, that the federal government, the Department of Home Affairs, actually make an announcement that not necessarily affects international students in particular, but the announcement was an extension on the number of English language tests that the government actually will consider for application of visas. And this is not necessarily for student visas, it's for many different types of visas. This announcement actually sparked conversations again, in particular in the media, talking about the English proficiency of international students here in Australia, which, as we know, it has been a topic that has been a question for many, many years, and it has been followed for many, many years. Now, the reality is that for many, many years, it has been proved, and there is evidence that shows that international students have, in the majority of the cases, the right level of English just to continue and be academically successful, and also to pursue the opportunities if they want to move on into Australia. But because it's a contested topic, it's something that we know that universities look carefully. And what we are trying just to provide today is just a different angle and probably a bigger picture of how universities are actually setting these English language requirements. Now, I should acknowledge also that we know that institutions, they monitoring their progression and the academic success of their students continuously. This is something that we are taking more from the entry point. And as you will see, this is only highlighting some of the difference that exist in terms of the English language testing. International students can access the university degrees through many different pathways, but this is just focused on how universities set these entry requirements based on different English language tests. Okay? So, as I said, it's a very important topic. And before we really get into the numbers and get into the data, I think it's very important just to acknowledge that setting English language requirements is actually quite a complex task. And overall, what we know is that universities are always trying to balance this basically statement of what is my value proposition that I'm putting into international markets, and what it should be the right level of English that not only lets me as university connect with the right group of international applicants that I'm trying to reach, but also ensures that students get academic success. So it's a very, very difficult and complex formula to balance. Now, there is a risk of not getting this right, of course. If you put your English language requirements too high, maybe you're not going to connect with that group of applicants that you are aiming to connect. But also, if you set your English language requirements very, very low, and you bring applicants who are not prepared and they start failing, that actually has a series of domino effects that you could imagine. Is not on the benefit of the students, and also is not on the benefit of institutions, because this is when their brand can actually be under a risk. So it's something that we know that everybody is looking carefully. And what we are trying to do today is just to provide, as I said, more information that helps to understand the complexity that exists in setting these English language requirements, but also the difference that and the different approach that universities are taking on this overall. Now, because we know it's quite a complex space and there are so many different considerations, what we have been doing for many, many years is just to assist universities with data. What we have been doing every 2 years is just to collect the information regarding what is at the moment the main English language tests. And we actually provide a comparative result across all the universities for undergraduate, postgraduate coursework programs. And also, I should say, we also do that for study abroad and exchange programs. So it's quite a comprehensive set of data, and we are very happy just to share some of the main findings today. Now, in order to do that, I first of all just want to give you a little bit of understanding of how we do the collection of data, what's involved, and how we classify this massive set of information that we collect. Then I'm just going to take you through some of what is currently the main differences that we see in terms of entry requirements and some of the main challenges that we probably can highlight that exist across the university sector in setting English language requirements. And of course, it's interesting also to see the difference that exists into how a score of a particular English language test, let's say the scores that you have for IELTS academic, is different to the score that universities set for other English language tests like TOEFL or PTE. So we're actually going to talk about those differences that we have identified as well. And finally, we will have time for some Q&A. As I said, it could be also not Q&A, it's also comments. We always love to hear from you. If you don't want to ask a question directly today in this session, feel free to contact us and we'll be able just to provide you with more information. Okay? All right. So let me just start giving a little bit of background. As I said, this topic of the level of English that international students have has been contested and criticized for many, many years. As I said, the majority of the analysis that have been put together show that international students actually, they perform quite well when actually they get into a university degree. And one very nice piece of data that I think is important just to share is something that comes from the latest 2023 International Student Experience Survey run by Quilt, which is definitely in the world of data one of those national treasures that we have, because it gives us a better understanding in so many different topics of what has been the experience of international students. And in the Quill data, basically the latest results that are available, it basically talks about the reasons why international students don't continue their courses. Every year on the Quill survey is about 12 to 14% of the students that unfortunately, for many, many reasons, they just don't complete their programs or basically just don't continue their program that they actually have been enrolled. And in the survey, students are able just to tick any of these different reasons. It could be as many as they are listed, and these are the results that they are giving us. So the the main reason why students, this is undergraduate students, do not finish their program is usually things like mental health or financial difficulties. Also at postgraduate level, pretty much about the same reasons. And as you will see in the bottom of your screen, only 7% of the students who left, so it's a very small part of the students who did not continue, and then actually they tick the reasons. Only 7% of this small group said that it was the English language skills. That's for undergrad. For postgrad, it's actually lower. It's about 6%. So English language is really not one of the main reasons why students are not academically successful, and they don't leave and this is not one of the main reasons why they leave their program. But we know that as universities, we are looking for something in the other side of the scale. We are not only looking for the minimum that we can do so students can stay in the program, we're actually looking for giving the students the right conditions and the right entry level so they actually thrive during their experience that they have in Australia and they are successful academically. So it's good to know that English language is not a reason why students are leaving, but it's important to understand that what we are aiming is something further from that. We're actually looking for something that gives a student the best possible experience that they could have. And that's when having the right entry level of English is such an important point, with many others, because we know it's not the only thing, but it's such an important thing that we need to consider. Okay. So what we have done every 2 years, and this has been done for quite a few years now at Studymove, is that we actually look at information that is on the public domain. So what we do is that basically we scan every single website and course guide across every single university in Australia. We collect the data, and with that, we actually provide a better understanding of what every single Australian university is doing in terms of the minimum score that they require for students to start their courses. Now, what we do is that at the moment, we are actually looking at four different programs, or sorry, not programs, English language tests. So we look at the results of IELTS Academic, we look at the results of TOEFL IBT, we look at the Cambridge exams, and we also look at the PTE Academic from Pearson, which is well known to be the main exams that universities recognize to provide entry to the program. Now, we know that there are others, and we know that universities are considering the use of other exams. And that's one of the reasons why we thought it would be very useful just to share this with you, just to have some awareness of how complex it could be to have different exams, but also how important it is just to monitoring that every single applicant is in the right level to really be successful academically. Okay. But at the moment, we're only looking at these four that we identify. This is actually the last results, and this is what I'm going to show to you, the 2024 results. These were in 2024 the main exams who were accepted by universities. But as I said, we fully understand that there will be more as we progress in the next couple of years. Okay? All right. Now, what we have done, just to have a better understanding of how these English language requirements work across all universities, is that we actually collect all the data, we got the minimum scores, overall scores for each one of the tests, but also the different sections. But also it was very important just to classify the programs in two main groups. We identified that overall universities have a large group of programs that we can call standard English proficiency requirements, which is usually business, science, humanities, information technology. And then we have a second group, which is a group that overall requires an advanced English proficiency. And I'm talking about programs like education, health, psychology, and law, with most of the time, actually, I will say pretty much every single time has actually a higher a requirement for English just to start that program. So we actually had those two different groups. So in our analysis, we make clear who is who, and we allow universities to benchmark against each other. And I'm just going to share you through this presentation some results that actually are sometimes for the standard English proficiency programs and sometimes for this advanced group of programs. Okay? All right. So that's basically the methodology that we follow. As you can imagine, there's a lot of work that is involved on all this. But based on the latest result, I'm just going to show you some of the difference that we identified and also some of the complexity that exists in setting these English language requirements. So the first thing is that I'm just going to give you a few examples of the differences across universities with IELTS. Also, I'm going to talk about the difference that exists when you see the results for TOEFL. And later in the presentation, we're going to talk about how when you actually correlate TOEFL with others or IELTS with others, there is also a difference. But let's just go one by one as we actually start this presentation. So starting with the overall results for IELTS Academic, this is the overall score that it has been published by universities. Let me just give you an indication of how different is the approach of universities here in Australia. So for undergraduate programs, and this is the standard one, so the business, the humanities, so not the advanced one, this is just the standard programs. 0 universities require a minimum IELTS of 5.5 overall. Then we have 22 universities require an IELTS of 6.6 overall. Then we have a second group of 17 universities asking for 6.5, and that's it. We don't have any at 7 and anybody at 7.5. Now, this is a standard undergrad, but also you can see on your screen now the difference that exists with a postgrad. With postgrad, it seems that there is a more uniform approach with 32 universities asking for an IELTS of 6.5. Now, this difference that we know that it has been for a long time is something that is important just to take a moment and think about why there is a difference in the approach taken by universities. And let me just start looking briefly at the undergraduate results. 22 universities, they think that the correct minimum level of IELTS is 6.0 versus the other half that is 6.5. So pretty much on undergrad, we are 50-50, which shows that for many universities, they believe that an undergraduate program, because it's a lower qualification, and probably because the students, they can receive additional support, a 6.0 is what it's enough for them just to have an academically successful journey. Postgrad, going back to postgrad again, it kind of the rationality seems to be that because postgraduate programs have a higher qualification, that's what the majority of universities agree that an IELTS of 6.5 overall is the right spot to be. Now, as you can see, there are 7 universities in the postgraduate side of things that still think that an IELTS of 6.0 is the right spot. And we look carefully at correlations of why some others are 6.5, maybe it's well-ranked universities versus lower-ranked universities. There is not really a clear correlation of why one or other are actually taking an approach in each one of these scores. But what we identify is that definitely for postgraduate programs, the majority of these 7 universities that actually are reporting a lower IELTS minimum required are actually universities who are in regional areas. I think that what happens is that some of these universities know that it's hard to get postgraduate students into the regions. So this is an opportunity just with a lower IELTS level, just to attract more applicants. I also think that they believe that because when you're in the regions, you actually probably have more access to student support, or because the campuses are smaller, you can actually have a look at monitoring the progress of these students. which therefore makes you feel comfortable just to have a lower level of IELTS. But definitely, in any case, it's important just to address a couple of things. First of all, obviously, there is not a uniform approach across the universities. And secondly, it seems that some universities obviously know that this entry point is just a starting point of a journey. They think that they can actually do something just to ensure that the students could continue and progressing properly. But I think we need to acknowledge that for some universities, this is part of the value proposition that they put into the market and they feel comfortable about it. But as we said at the start of the presentation, I also think we need to acknowledge that it could be a risk, and monitoring the progression of these students that start the program with lower levels of IELTS is super important, just to ensure that students have the right experience and we don't have any problems with a lot of students failing that can eventually affect the brand of institutions. And also, I think we need to acknowledge that could actually affect the brand not only of institutions but of the whole sector, because these things tend to generalize. The failure of probably one sometimes actually is seen as the failure of the whole sector. So we need to be having that important consideration when we do all this. Okay? So that's the main differences that exist, that they are significant, in my opinion. But what is also quite interesting is when we look at these more advanced, not advanced programs, but programs that require a more advanced English proficiency to start. And what I'm showing you today is on the screen is the results of the minimum entry requirements for IELTS, once again, the overall scores for education programs. Now, as you can see, the majority of universities acknowledge that these programs require a higher level of English. And let me just go back to the previous screen so you can see how much is the transition. So basically in undergrad, from some universities that have IELTS of 6 and IELTS of 6.5, when you actually look only at education programs, you see that there is a clear shift into higher levels of IELTS as a requirement to start the program. So for undergraduate programs, 28 universities, they require an IELTS of 7.5. And for postgraduate programs, we have IELTS of 25 universities with an IELTS of 7.5, which is actually a very advanced level of IELTS. Now, once again, what is interesting is just to see these other ones, which they're still on the same level that you will consider is a standard level of English requirement. So 6 universities report an IELTS of 6.5. Once again, it will be interesting and important just to look at the rationality behind this. We're not saying that there is a right or wrong, but I think it's important just to have an extra consideration. It could be the type of the program. It could be, once again, that some universities feel that they can successfully support the students academically through the journey. So even though the entry point is a little bit lower, they feel that they can actually do the right thing so students are successful during their degree. But once again, there is a majority of universities taking an approach on this and some exemptions that are important just to consider. Now, the complexity of this actually increases when we look at the scores, not only at the overall scores, but also when we look at the scores in the different sections that each test has. And a good example of this is following this story of the education programs, when we actually look at one of the areas where universities consider that the students should have higher level of English for education programs. And I'm talking about the speaking module for IELTS. So for example, for education programs at undergraduate level, these are the results. If you want to study an education program in Australia, there are 5 universities that will admit you with a speaking score of IELTS of 6. Then we have one with 6.5, then we have 7, then we have 7.5, and then once again, the majority of universities actually put in what is actually a very high level, which is IELTS of 8.0. So there is a majority of universities taking an approach into all this, but once again, we had a few handful that probably are taking a different approach. And that's, I think, something to consider. It may be that these other universities have not adjusted their entry requirements, but this is when having the complete data set and a complete picture of what's happening across the sector is extremely useful just to understand what's happening and not just having a general approach saying, oh, international students, they just don't speak good English. Well, it really depends what are you looking and how you're looking at it. But also shows that there is a clear level of complexity in setting the right entry scores across the different programs and across the different tests that exist. All right, so that's the overall look of IELTS, but I thought it would be very useful just to look at a TOEFL as well. Now, the structure of TOEFL itself, as most of you will know, it's quite different to IELTS. And the way in which a TOEFL score is reported is actually more flexible because it's not only on bands, it's your actual scored based on points. And the overall scores is when you add the different scoring that you get by section. So it's actually a more flexible and a wider approach that exists with TOEFL, which therefore this is creating that universities are taking a wider approach as well. So as you can see on the screen, these are the overall IBT scores reported for what we call an undergraduate standard requirement. And once again, you can see that there are two groups of universities. There are 7 who actually have a minimum score of 60, and then you have 11 who have 79. But then you have these other ones in the middle, which obviously they have some reasons, some rationalities. In some instances, is because particular sections or modules of the TOEFL require a higher level. And that's actually changing the overall scores across the whole university sector. But it shows once again that there is not necessarily one approach into all this. Universities are actually looking at different factors. And even we need to understand that within universities, there are different voices that actually are asking for higher levels in particular areas than others. This probably what shows is once again that there is not necessarily a uniform approach. This also shows that depending in which approach you are taking, it's also very important just to back up the rationality with monitoring the progress of the students, because maybe setting a TOEFL of 75, there's only one university taking that approach. Maybe it's not necessarily the right one. Maybe for your university, maybe you should go to 79. But I think that it shows how flexible and complex is this conversation. Once again, looking at an example of what we call these advanced programs, I'm showing and sharing what I call what is the undergraduate education overall scores that are a minimum for TOEFL IBT. And once again, you see a range of different responses. For universities, 79, then you have another 1, then you have 6, 4, 4, 1, 1. But it is actually quite a wide range. It's from having a TOEFL, and a lot of you, I'm sure, are experts in this area, but having a TOEFL of 105 versus a TOEFL of 79 is very, very different. So I think that it's important, once again, just to look at this in more detail and figure out if this is the right level based on the support that you can provide to your candidates and more your candidates to your students, or if there is something else that it's missing there, because this is a real clear range of responses that we didn't expect it, but it's happening across the sector. All right. To continue this conversation, and in something that I think universities are finding probably more complicated, especially when you look across all your peer university, is this correlation or relation that exists across the different English language tests. And at the moment, in our analysis, as I said, we're only looking at 4, but as more tests are adopted, I think it's important for institutions just to have a closer look so that you can actually have the right relationship across your different exams. Because it will not make sense that if you have, let's say, an IELTS of 6.5 reported for undergraduate programs, then you actually have a TOEFL or a PTE or a Cambridge that is actually not a representation of that particular result for IELTS. So there is a complex process that it has to follow. And let me just show you some examples of some of the differences that we have already identified at this stage. For example, when we compare the results between TOEFL IBT and IELTS, and once again, full disclosure, we understand that they are very different tests, but I will imagine that we will expect that there is a certain level of relationship between one and the other. And in general, there is this relationship between one or the other. But in some cases, there are some very interesting exceptions that exist in the university sector. So the chart that I'm going to show you is the relationship that exists between universities that report a minimum overall score of IELTS. Let's say they report a 6.0 in IELTS or they report a 6.5 in IELTS, and how that relates to the reports or the minimum entry requirement for TOEFL that is reported for the same programs. So as I said, for undergraduate programs, we had 22 universities that report a minimum IELTS of 6.0. Then for a TOEFL, so these same universities, 7 actually report a minimum TOEFL score of 60. And then we had different responses. We have 64, 68, 70, 72, 78, all the way to 80, and all the way to 79, and then one university that report an 80, even though they also report an IELTS of 6.0. So quite a range, and I understand that the way in which TOEFL is structured may lead to this wide range of responses. Then we have the other group of universities that probably you remember. We had 17 universities that report an IELTS of 6.5. And those universities, 9 actually report a TOEFL of 79, the majority of them. And then once again, we had other responses going all the way to a 90 for a TOEFL if you have an IELTS score of 65. So for a small group of universities, they kind of have similar uniform approach, but for some others, it's actually quite different. The ones that is quite interesting is these ones that you can see on the screen, because these universities that they set an IELTS of 6.0, but they have levels of TOEFL that are more on the range of an IELTS of 6.5. So maybe for those universities, it will be interesting to learn why they're actually doing that. If they see a difference in the TOEFL that makes them, question or makes them wonder if the student comes with the right level of English, it could be maybe just an error, or could actually be something that requires an additional look, because this is the kind of range, and it's just a few universities, as you can see. It's only 3 universities, but it's something that I think is important just to acknowledge. And once again, it shows that this is actually quite a complex space that I think requires just to have a closer look. But as you can see, there is some interesting differences that exist already when you actually see the different score for IELTS and the different score for TOEFL. In the same kind of space, and we have many examples in our analysis, when we actually have seen that you drill down at the scores for each one of the sections, we also have seen that there are some different ways to take this approach. This is a good example. This is just with PTE academic. This is for postgraduate standard programs, and this is just only looking at grading scores. So once again, Just grading scores, we only have identified 2 universities that if you want to do a postgraduate program, admit students that have a IELTS of 5.5 in grading. For those same universities, they reported PTE. One is 46 in grading, the other one is 50 in grading. Now, the vast majority of universities in Australia, they require an IELTS of 6.0 in grading. And then we actually have 26 that require a 50 PTE in writing. And then we have, once again, a wide range of responses going all the way to a 60. Now, what is interesting is just this one, for example. The same university that is reporting an IELTS of 5.5 is basically asking for the same level of writing on PTE, which once again is one of the different examples that we have during the analysis that shows that it's not all universities, but in some cases, there are some slight inconsistencies that I think it will be valuable just to reconsider. But more importantly, I think that what it shows is that it is a complex space. And I think that it's very important for universities. And I know that universities, they look at this carefully, but sometimes things get so busy and so complicated that we kind of forget to keep updating entry requirements, which are such an important part of the recruitment process. But I think it's important just to be aware about these complexities that exist, not only when you see the overall scores, but also when you actually see the results for each sections. And as I've been saying through the presentation, we think that it's important that now that other English language tests are available, which is great. It's great for the sector that you have the opportunity as universities just to be able just to find the right group of students and have the reassurance that they are tested properly. But I think it's important just to take the time just to ensure that you actually are putting together the right entry scores. This is in particular, I think, very important for all those programs that you know that they require an advanced proficiency in English, like education, health, psychology, and law. But also, I think it's important just to complement this analysis on entry point data, really, with the way in which students are progressing. In the past, we have seen quite a bit of research, but I'm talking about this is pre-COVID, quite a bit of research on how actually students are actually progressing depending on the different scores that they had. So it'd be great to see that that continues, so we can actually ensure that the students are getting the right level and also ensure that there is the integrity that we require in the sector. So if you want to learn more about this report, this is one of those that, to be honest, we are very proud because we know that it has been very useful for the different universities that they are using it, just to have that additional information on what others are doing and just to have in just one screen a better understanding of what in general universities are doing to really set their entry requirements. If you want to have information about it, please contact us. We'll be more than happy just to provide you more information or even show you a demo of all the information that is collected. But definitely we have identified that there are different approaches in the way universities are actually setting their English language entry requirements. And I think it's important just to take the time just to look into it, just to ensure that your students and your value proposition has the level and the integrity that is required to reach your institutional goals. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed it. It was a short presentation, but I think it was very clear just to understand that there are some clear differences. And if you have any questions now, I will be taking some questions. And on that note, I think it's time to go. So thank you so much for joining, and we'll be in touch very, very soon. Okay.